You're watching Before the Registrar Starts, produced by GP Supervisors Australia and presented by Dr. Gordon Walling and Magella Beagley. We would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which this recording was produced and pay our respects to their elders past, present, future and their families.
Good evening, everyone. Gordon Walling's my name. I'm a GP in Boronia, which is in the eastern suburbs of Melbourne. Been at the practice for 30 years. I actually joined that practice as a registrar, I think we were called then, as part of the family medicine program, and I've stayed. We've been a training practice for at least that long. There have been breaks with different organisations and the like. We have been a teaching practice for a long time, the complexities of which have changed enormously over the years. And to deal with a lot of that, we have Magella.
Thanks, Gordon. My name's Magella Beagley. I've been the practice manager at Boronia Medical Centre since 2011. Prior to that, I was a practice nurse at another GP clinic, and before that, a school nurse. So I look after all the business running of the general practice, all the compliance and the huge amount of paperwork we have to do every day. When I started as a practice manager at Boronia Medical Centre, the role has evolved enormously since then, and we just keep growing and being surrounded by more and more paperwork. So hopefully you'll find some tips and tricks that will help you through particularly the registrar working at your clinic. But this information is the same if it's a contracted or a fellow or a locum doctor coming to work to your clinic. You still have to jump through all these hoops. So hopefully you'll find it a bit helpful. The process really begins at the interview. You need to discuss the contract you intend to use so there's no issues down the track. And why we have included this in the first part, because the interviewing process is really important. It's important to try and interview a good range of registrars. So an interview being a two-way process, the registrar is interviewing you as much as you are interviewing them, and they're looking for a quality teaching practice where they're going to have a great range of experiences. And the contract all comes down to being all the legal things. For any practice manager that's not sure, you can become an honorary member of GPSA, and they have actual employment templates that you can download and utilise for each semester. So the GPSA contract is a little bit different from the GPRA contract, which is the General Practice Registrars Association. And you need to understand the differences in those. The registrars will want you to use the GPRA. So you really need to know what the difference is between the two of them. Once you've done the interview, you go into the selection. You're about 2 or 3 months out before the registrar's due to start. You've done the selection, you've done the match process for the placement. The registrar needs to apply for a provider number for your location, being applied through the training organisation. But as things change and evolve, it's very much a watch this space. All the Medicare paperwork requires this provider number for you to be able to start to lodge. So we actually had a doctor start the other week, a fellow doctor. I actually only had 2 weeks to get all this paperwork done. We got there by the skin of our teeth. The more time you have to do it, the better, because there's always a chance you forget something. So the common Medicare forms that you're going to be looking at, and GPSA have provided resources at the end of this where we've listed all these things. And it's great to have this checklist because I can assure you for many years we didn't. So the online claiming provider agreement, the provider registration for electronic funds transfer payments, the bank account details for online claiming, the general practitioner 90-day doctor check scheme. That's for when the patient doesn't bring in the rebate check and you've got to wait another 90 days to get an auto payment. The practice incentives individual general practitioner, nurse practitioner or health professional details, and the practice incentives change of practice details. I believe now you can do those through your Proda HBOS account, and that saves a little bit of paperwork. And then the last one is the general practitioner aged care access incentive. That's if they're doing visits to aged care homes and all those sorts of things. All these forms have almost the same information on each form, but they're all different. It is advisable to download each form every time you need it. You can fill it in online, But the little tip with the forms that require the company's ABN, you need to use your Shift and Tab key to go back, because it keeps missing boxes where numbers are meant to go. But you can just print them off and fill them out in handwriting, but it's quite simple to fill them out online, and then you can print the form. But I've always found I need to print the new forms every time, because even if they change in the slightest way, the completed forms will be returned from Medicare or the e-commerce business part of Medicare, because it has to be on exactly the right form. So I tend to use new forms every time. Then there are many numbers to collect from the registrar. Provider numbers being the first one, the prescriber number, the individual health identifier number. You cannot set them up for electronic scripts and the like if you don't have this. Now, the tip for that one is it's a 16-digit number. The first 6 digits are 800-361, and the last 10 digits are the invoice number on their APRA registration form, not their APRA number. It's the invoice number or their membership number, probably. So that's where you find that 16-digit number, and you need that for e-scripts and any sort of electronic referrals and the like. You need the APRA number, of course, and that's going to start with MED. Your medical indemnity insurance information, you'll need that to complete some of the forms online, because they want to know what their membership number and what organisation they're with. Tax file number, of course, you need to fill that out for the ATO, personal bank account details, and superannuation details. So the only number you're not really collecting, I think, are the lotto numbers, and they would be really quite useful if we could have those too. 1 month before the registrar starts, add the registrar to your systems, and you're probably going to find you're going to need all those numbers to do that. You add them to your medical software, your payroll software, you register them for all the electronic services, e-scripts, pathology, radiology, results, and the like. Add the registrar profile to your social media platforms and website. A great photo, always patients like to see who they're coming to see, and a little bit of a bio about them, what their interests are. And it's also nice to have a little bit of something of what they do outside the clinic. We like to see that we're all-rounded people and follow a particular football team or bushwalk or whatever. Enable the online bookings through the portals, through your online booking portals, whether it's Hot Docs, AutoMed, or through your website. Register for translation services, and this is one that sort of gets a little bit forgotten, but it's actually part of accreditation these days. So if you've got an accreditation coming up, they want to know that everyone's registered for translation services to be dealing with diverse populations. And provide the roster, particularly if you've got them rostered on working a Saturday morning or things like that. We need to ensure that they're available for those Saturdays that you want them working. We usually roster our registrars with their supervisor, so they've got that buddy system. 1 week before, update the orientation pack. Now, our orientation pack has evolved over about 10 years. It started off as a very thin document to start with. I always put a photo of every doctor in the clinic and what their specialties are. Our staff wear name tags, but our doctors don't. So it's nice that they can recognise that face and then put the names to them. They also know what their specialties are if they've got a burning question about a particular thing. In the beginning, it really just started with who all the doctors were, who all the team members were, how to call in sick. And then we thought, well, we had to add something really important about where to get the best coffee in the area. So we put that sort of thing in. Then we put the most frequently billed Medicare numbers, who the referral people are in the area, all those sorts of things. And then at the end of every registrar finishing, we go back to them and say, what wasn't in there that you needed? Is there anything you want to add to it? And in the last couple of rotations we've had, the registrars actually said, well, I'm happy to put my contact number there if the new registrar wants to have a chat about something. So our orientation pack has grown over the time. It's a little blue book that gets passed on, like passing the baton, if you like. In that, we include the passwords to the IT systems and the access details. That includes how to get into the building and disarm alarms and things like that. We provide training links to our medical software. If you've got them, they're great. We send those to the registrar and they can have a play with them before they come to the practice, particularly if they're coming for subsequent rotations and they've not used your medical software before. We ensure the consulting room is set up and well stocked. And go and sit in there for a little while and just make sure that everything is where it should be and it's easy to find for them. On day one that they come to the clinic, we do a bit of a welcome to clinic. We give them their orientation pack. We give them a practice tour and introductions. And we do all the WHS induction, health and safety exits, all those sorts of things. We tend to try and set up the first couple of hours just learning the computer, giving them some test patients to have a play with, finding out how to print scripts, referrals, make notes, and all those sorts of things. So that's what I've got for the moment. Gordon.
Thank you, Magella. My preparations for the registrar, it's not as detailed as Magella's, and there's good reasons for that. I think one of the most important things is making sure as part of your organisation, you do have someone who is in charge of all those details. A good practice manager is a massive step here because, as you can see, it's quite a lot to deal with. So you do need people who are across the administrative side of things. From the supervisor's point of view, I think you've got to understand, or at least you've got to be going into this for the right reasons. Why are you having registrars? What are you trying to achieve here? If you're thinking that, gee, we need an extra doctor, we've got patient demand, we need bums on seats, let's get a registrar and churn them through, clearly that's going about it all the wrong ways. You're making a commitment to teaching, to the progression of the profession. It's not all altruistic because if you're doing it right, you are potentially tapping into a great labour force for your long-term stability and growth of your practice. Because if you're doing the job right, you will find that a lot of registrars will be wanting to stay or return. So it's really understanding why you're going into it, I think, is the key. And I think that's the most important preparation if anyone is considering becoming a supervisor. Now, part of that is understanding your teaching requirements and making sure that that is something that you take seriously and you stick to. And as part of the preparation for that, I think it's important that you go into it not with the thought of, well, okay, I've got a T1 coming up, that's an hour and a half face-to-face teaching. I can squeeze in half an hour on 3 lunchtimes of a week. That's not going to work. You need to set aside some dedicated time where you can sit down face-to-face with your registrar in a situation where both you're feeling relaxed and able to teach and the registrar is feeling relaxed and able to listen and to learn. As part of that, it is also important to make sure that the registrar understands they are coming here as a teaching position and that they're not cannon fodder. They're not going to be grinding through X number of patients. There are certain patient commitments required, but what we need to do is make sure they have the time. But the time it takes you to deal with a straightforward problem is not what it takes a registrar. And they need to know that they've got the time in their appointment books, the time they require to deal with those patients, and to know that there is always somebody that they can contact. We're fortunate in our practice that we have a number of doctors who have been registrars, and so they have this philosophy as well. So the primary point of call is the supervisor, but if the supervisor either doesn't know or is unavailable, they can speak to somebody else. And it's very important that they are aware that they should ask questions, can ask questions, and that their questions will be treated with respect and in appropriate timeframes. So they need to know how they contact the supervisor. You need to make sure it's very clear. There's nothing worse than a registrar suddenly bursting through your door. You want to make sure that you've got a good, clear method, whether it's via phone, via intramail, whatever suits, so that the registrar can seek appropriate opinion in a timely manner. Part of teaching also involves delivering feedback, both good and bad. And again, it's important that registrars know that this is something that will happen and that it's delivered in a timely and appropriate way. So not in front of a waiting room for all patients, obviously, but confidentially, speaking to the registrar directly, giving them the opportunity to voice, obviously, their side of the story, what happened, whether it be good or bad, because it's important that the registrar is there to learn, and we learn. Feedback's an important part of learning, and it needs to be delivered in an appropriate manner.
Gordon, have you got anything to say about the ECTV visits when the external medical supervisor comes in?
They're always, I think, an interesting point. I think they're something that fill most registrars with a degree of fear. And I think most registrars will always try and turn on the perfect consultation in front of the external teacher. Nevertheless, the good external teaching visits, they're aware of that as well, and they know what they're looking for. And I think the feedback there is always appropriate and should be well received by the registrars. Generally, it is. And again, it's a matter of how the feedback is delivered.
Thanks, Gordon. I just want to leave you with one last tip that a very wise practice manager gave to me many years ago, and I've given it to lots of people, and the practice managers that I've been mentoring through the training organisation the last couple of years, this is their key take-home message. So every month you've got to report back to the training organisation. You've got to report back the numbers of hours that they've worked, the numbers of consultations that they've had, and you've also got to report back on what the teachings have been. So gone are the days where I rely on little scraps of paper being put on my desk. So what we now do is we set the registrar up as a patient in our software, so best practice, and we call it registrar and whatever their first name is. And then we ask them to document all their teaching sessions and dates with the supervisor and list all the topics that have been discussed. So the first week of teaching would be training in best practice, learning how to do scripts, whatever. These are all part of the teaching requirement for the registrar. We also suggest that they record all questions that can wait until the next teaching session. They're not burning questions, but there's something that they want to have addressed. So this is sort of like an electronic diary that I can link into when I need it, and it enables the supervisors to see where the registrar is up to. They can also check on areas they think they still need to address. It becomes a comprehensive record of their learning journey. And this is an example of a recorded teaching session that we ask our registrars to record. Case study is not sufficient. Case study 45-year-old male is not sufficient. And I've lifted this from one of our very good registrars many years ago in 2015, and it was a teaching with supervisor number one. Number one was scoliosis, diagnosis, management, and then some details if Cobb angles are greater than 10 and whatever. The next one was AF patient and anticoagulation, a case study, complex patient with AF and 89 years old, high risk of stroke, discussed with supervisor whether or not to start NOACs. And then third, allergies, when to refer to an immunologist, GT management, including antihistamine, steroids, and whatever. That gives you a good example of what would be discussed in a teaching session. So then this detailed teaching report can be directly added to the RCTI for the training organisation. So it also, if you've got a couple of supervisors in your clinic, like we're fortunate to have, and one is away for any unexplained reason, the other supervisor can actually see where they've been up to, what they've discussed in a particular area, and what needed to go further. So this makes the reporting from something that used to take me about an hour a month to do to about 5 minutes. You print your reports for your patient numbers, you print your reports for the hours that they've consulted, and then you literally copy and paste the teaching record into the teaching notes for the training organisation. By doing this, I've never had any problem with claims being rejected. They're verified by the supervisor and the registrar quite quickly because the registrar's actually made these notes. And of course, because it's in the medical software, the supervisor can go and make notes in as well. So it makes a good electronic learning journal for the registrar.
So what I might do is actually share my screen and show you a couple of these documents. So if you email memberservices@gpsa.org.au, that's all one word, memberservices, We can send hard copies and resources for new supervisors and practice managers, and also established supervisors as well. I might just quickly run through this first one, which is before the registrar starts, which Magella has spoken about from the beginning. So this is a document we can send hard copies to. You can also download it from our website. On the website, there's the menu item and it's supporting practices. You click that and then you click before the registrar starts and you get a page like this. It highlights the different components at the different stages. So the times, the timeframes, and then all the key documents. So key tasks are here and then it's split up with key documents. And then those common Medicare documents are also here as well. And same for 1 month, 1 week, day 1 and week 4. Important, I guess, to notice is the difference between before the registrar starts, which is quite holistic, and what you're probably more used to seeing, which is an orientation checklist. So an orientation checklist is a lot more detailed. It's focused. It's around that day 1, that week 1, walk them through the clinic, do this, do that, work health and safety, what have you, give them keys, whatever, which Magella has spoken about. This before the registrar starts is a little bit more holistic and covers that big, broad time frame. So as you can see, you can have a hard copy or PDF version of this, and it's organized by the time frame and separated key tasks, key documents, and they're kind of aligned. So employment documentation, you want to start looking at that 2 to 3 months before, and here are some of the key documents to do that on the right. You're familiar, as Magella said, with the employment contract, which one you're using, that the addendum to the contract is also the NTCER. So the registrar knows all those conditions and things. If you want more information, for instance, on NTCER, or you find there are some things you know less about, there are links in these key documents to take you elsewhere throughout GPSA and resources. So for instance, there's a FAQ on the NTCER. If that's a new document to you, it'll answer questions and get you involved. So that's 2 to 3 months before. You scroll down, there's 1 month before, key tasks, key documents. Same again, day 1. So that orientation checklist, which you're probably most familiar with, is sitting there. And then by week 4, a follow-up of things. Maybe we didn't speak too much to them just now, but some of those key tasks here: planning, learning, the local services, high-risk consultations. So if you've heard of the call for help list, how you might potentially want to use that. It's also a good tool for identifying knowledge gaps or weaknesses, and therefore planning, learning and teaching. The last one here, which is quite important, is the performance management and pastoral care stuff. So once they've settled in, how do you manage that ongoing? We had some questions, a pre-question on retention. Magella, did you want to speak to that comment about registrar retention? So you've got someone on board, how do you keep them there potentially?
Well, really, Lachlan, it's like any staff. Once you get them on board and you invest in their training and induction, the retention is something that you really want to try and retain people. Patients are comfortable with the doctors and the like. So it comes back down to what sort of a clinic are you to work in. If they've had a really good experience in your clinic, they may look to come back later down the road, further into their training or after their training. It really comes down to the quality of the teaching that they get, how comfortable they feel working, and how much they've actually enjoyed your clinic. It's the same with anyone, whether it's a new reception staff or a registrar, whether they want to continue working in your clinic. At our clinic, we're lucky. I think we've got 8 or 9 registrars that have returned to us. So clearly they've had a really good experience in their learning. They've passed their exams quite well, and they've found that the culture of the place was somewhere where they wanted to return to. It's the same really with anyone working in your clinic.
Yeah, I think it boils down to them feeling happy, feeling contented, feeling valued, feeling part of a team, and also philosophically aligned medically with the medicine that's practiced in the practice. They're the things that will aid with your retention of registrars. Just a matter of how they perceive you and you doing what you need to do to make sure, if it's your aim, to have them perceive you in the best light, which I think we should be doing anyway.
As a member of GPSA, you're always welcome to email member services at gpsa.org.au, and that can be about anything, not just before the registrar starts. And we can help point you in the right direction. There's personalised one-on-one support for supervisors, and Magella highlighted also practice managers. Thank you everyone for joining. And thanks, Dr. Walling and Magella again for presenting today.
Thank you.
GP Supervisors Australia is supported by funding from the Australian Government under the Australian General Practice Training Program.